Hello, this is Robert Rickover, and I'm an Alexander Technique teacher in Omaha, Nebraska. My guest and conversationalist today is Imogen Ragone, an Alexander Technique teacher in Wilmington, Delaware. We both teach mainly on Zoom these days. And this will be the second in our series of taking short, pithy Alexander Technique quotes, typically from either Alexander himself or first-generation teachers, but could be from anyone, and breaking them down a little bit. And so Imogen, welcome, and thank you for doing this.
Oh, you're very welcome. I'm very glad to be here, I think.
Well, we have our last one was a quote from Margaret Goldie that was just fraught with complexity for a short quote. And I think this will be from the man himself, F. Matthias Alexander. And I think it too is pretty fraught with questions. And probably I should say here that this conversation is mainly for Alexander Technique teachers and students, although others may find it interesting. But we will be using some terminology that might not make sense to some people not familiar with the Alexander Technique. Sure. So I'm going to start by reading the quote.
Yes.
Here it is. You want to know if you're right. When you get further along, you will be right, but you won't know it and won't want to know if you're right. What are your first thoughts on that?
My initial thoughts was he's crazy. I always want to be right. But in the context of Alexander Technique,
right?
And I think he's using the word right in this context that you're moving with good use, shall we say, or something. Or what do you think he means by right? I mean,
I think it could be
something like
that. As a student of the technique, and you've been taught something, maybe an Alexander Technique direction to use, and you want to know if it's actually doing what it's supposed to do.
Yeah.
Is it actually improving the way you're functioning? Or early on in lessons, a lot of people want to know if they're sitting correctly. Am I being right in terms of,
am I doing it right? Yeah.
Am I in the right position? Which is that kind of
and
thing.
Especially in the traditional chair work. When I've worked with that, don't do that so much these days, but people want to know, are they doing it right? Are they doing it right? In that context, I would think right means, am I moving in the prescribed way? Am I doing it as
doing what the teacher wants me to do?
Yeah.
Or doing whatever I'm doing with less strain, more ease.
Yes.
That kind of thing. Yeah.
Yes. I mean, and what I'm thinking is that thought in itself, if you want to know if you did it right or that you're right, whether it's in terms of giving yourself a direction and it having the desired effect, or doing the movement in the way that you think the teacher wants you to do it or should be done. But even that thought takes you away from the process, the means whereby, right? Because
it's a form of end gaining.
Yes, because instead of being in the process, you're concerned with the end result. Yes. So.
Yes, yeah, and I agree with that, and I'd like to expand on it a little bit. I'd like to begin by saying most Alexander teachers today would not even talk about right or wrong.
Oh God, no.
And for good reason.
Yeah.
They aren't really very useful topics
Yeah.
for a student to even be thinking about, or a teacher to be thinking about, really.
Yes, and yet it does come up with our students.
It certainly comes up because in the real world, people want to do, they want to be doing things in the best way possible, or being right in what they're saying or doing. So, but again, it's not it's a word, right, and its best buddy, wrong, are words that really you have to cut Alexander, I think, a little slack here. He was a product of the late 19th century, and whatever. But I do think what you said is correct, that even concerning yourself with right is getting in the way of anything useful happening. Because the
it's
right,
getting in the way of being right.
Yes, it is getting in the way of being right. And I think this quote relates to the very same thing we've talked about in a number of conversations, which we've had a number of conversations centered around the general topic of the interface between your thoughts about what you would like to have go on with you and the implementation of that thought. And without going into really much of any detail, but a very simplified version would be, it's your prefrontal cortex that comes up with the ideas, like an Alexander direction, and the implementation is best left to the rest of you, the rest of your nervous system, the rest of your brain and nervous system and body. And that prefrontal cortex, the last thing in the world you want it to do is implement stuff. It just doesn't have that kind of capacity.
It's giving the directive.
It just says what it wants. Its job is to put out the idea and get out of the way. So if you're, for example, using a direction or following a teacher's instructions in some way, and part of you is concerned, am I doing it correctly or right? Then that concern about that muddies the message.
Yes.
And makes it much less likely that you will actually do something in a better way.
Yeah.
Which is really what you want to do.
Yeah.
And I guess it's important to I think part of the issue here is that if you're dealing in a world of machinery, for example, there is probably a right way to calibrate something on your car or your computer, but with a human being such as we are, it isn't really so much about being right or wrong, but maybe getting a little easier, a little less strain. It's not a binary right wrong thing. You're generally just wanting to improve, and you improve over time, and the cumulative effect of that, if you're doing it in a useful way, it can be very dramatic.
So I have a question about the second part of this quote.
Yes, let's get to that.
So it says that when you're further along, that you will be right. I guess that's because you've given up being concerned about being right, right? But you won't know it. This is the bit I'm curious to hear what you have to say about it. But you won't know it, and you won't want to know if you're right. So I can understand about the not wanting to know, because
Mhm.
if you still wanted to know, then you'd still be in the loop of trying to, you would still want to know. You'd still be doing the
Right.
first part. But the not knowing, I'm curious about, because one of the things that you could say that Alexander technique helps with is that we have an improved kinesthetic or proprioceptive sense of ourselves, right? That we more accurately, you could say, know where, if I'm putting my hand out to the side, that I know that it's horizontal, not like, not that we have a little bit better sense of ourselves. So you
Mhm.
could say that Alexander technique helps you know whether it's right or
Well,
not
it
in that
does.
context.
It helps you.
And that can be useful because,
Mhm.
anyway.
Well, I
So
think I think people who have Alexander lessons often notice that some really nice
yeah,
things are happening. But that's a little different from wanting to know if they're right. I mean, there will be improvements in their functioning that they will obviously know about. Their friends will comment on it, right? "Hey, you seem taller or more open," or
yeah,
there.
I'm not kind of talking about that. I'm talking about this kind of like I say you're in a you've studied Alexander technique
Mhm.
and you're in some sort of fitness class where it's telling you need to be, have your arm here or your leg there, and it needs to be in this
Oh, okay.
arrange. I think Alexander technique helps us be better aware of ourselves, to be able to better follow the directions, to be more correct in how we're because anyway, so you still
Well,
understand what I'm getting
yeah,
at. It's to do
it's
with
tricky.
to do with the faulty sensory perception, and that we start off with, that
Mhm.
becomes less and less faulty. So you could say that it's more and more right.
You could say, and it probably in one way of thinking about it is more right.
Mhm.
But in the moment when you are engaged in making a change in your functioning by using, say, an Alexander direction,
Mhm.
you may feel something, you may feel that you're moving differently after you're using a direction. But first of all, whatever you're feeling is outdated by the time you feel it.
Correct.
And in the word, actually, the person who has put that in the most succinct way is Mio Morales, who would say, well, your feelings are yesterday's news.
Yeah.
And that just is built in. That has nothing to do with faulty perception. That has to do with it. It takes a while for information to travel
Yeah.
around
And
your.
when we say yesterday, that's like less than a second,
Yeah,
maybe.
yesterday is
Yeah.
not like really yesterday. But the thing is that yesterday's news in this context is
Yeah.
useful in a way. I mean, it does might tell you that things are getting better, but it's not necessarily totally accurate about what's going on right in the moment.
Mhm.
And probably your best bet is just not to worry about that, not to worry about what it feels like until after you've perhaps done a little experiment. Tried this, tried that, experiment, did this little way of thinking, that way of thinking, and then you could do a little retrospective thinking, well, which one seemed to be easier looking back on it? But in the
Which one
moment,
seemed to be right? Just
well,
going back to the quote,
well, not
being devil's
right, but
advocate.
easy.
I
Did I
know, I
feel
know.
like
I
when I
believe you.
walked with a particular thought A, I noticed that my feet didn't come down as clunkily on the floor. And when I walked using technique B or idea B, it was kind of a heaviness in them. And I even felt some downward pressure in my torso or whatever. But that's after the fact.
Yes. So being devil's advocate,
Sure, go for it.
Which is my favorite occupation.
I know.
Using FM's language from whenever he wrote this,
yeah,
wouldn't he say that that you are looking to see which way was right or not?
Not while you're running an experiment.
No, not while you're doing it, but you might still want to know afterwards.
Sure, afterwards you can do anything you want, doesn't matter. I mean, I think the whole point of doing an experiment is to do something that then you can now view at some distance a little bit afterwards.
I want to make it very clear for you and our viewers that I would never talk in terms of getting it right. I was deliberately using the language from the quote to kind of make a little point, but yeah.
I think his sentence, when you get further along, you will be right, but you won't know it. That's the part that bothers you a little bit. You won't know it.
Yeah.
And
I can really understand that you'll be right and you won't need to know whether you are or not, but
or you'd be at a level that you won't know it, and you'll realize there's no way to know it because you know about this time delay problem.
Okay.
I mean, whether or not Alexander had that in mind, I don't know. I do think that the key phrase is the last one. You won't know it and you won't want to know if you're right. I think that may be the most important line in there, that you will be at a place where knowing the desire to know whether it's right in the moment of an experiment is just not there anymore, because you've learned from experience that there's nothing to be gained by trying to find out. Now, that's not to say that you do something, someone gives you a direction or helps you with their hands to move more easily, and it's an overwhelmingly different sensation, and you do feel much easier and your breathing opens or something dramatic happens. And you don't want to necessarily push that away. It may just jump out at you, and you could say, that's really great, but I'd like to get back to it once I finish the experiment. So you're not repressing feelings here. That's certainly not what we're suggesting. I think it's just a couple of sentences that he came up with, probably in the context of a particular student that he was working with.
It seems related with trying.
And he had probably had a student that was sort of asking him, well, is that better or whatever? And he had to come up with a way of saying, in a way that the student could truly grasp, that that's just not a profitable enterprise in this.
Yeah. Trying to figure out whether you're right or not is
never going to take you anywhere useful. Yeah. So
agreed. Yeah.
So is there anything else any other thoughts you have on the great man's pronouncement?
No, except that these pronouncements feel like they're pronouncements from on high.
They are. He's the founder.
And yet they're not completely clear. So, yeah.
Well, maybe in part they're not clear because
lack of context.
There are a couple of reasons why they're not. First of all, it might have been a particular student situation that you don't know about, but also Alexander himself, I think, was struggling with this whole question. we talked, I think in an earlier conversation, this interview he had with one of his students on his first training course, George Trevelyan, who took notes and talked to Alexander a lot and wrote down what Alexander said. And Alexander at one point said, none of my students believe that all they have to do is think the direction, now do the trick. They're all slaves to their muscles.
So you could say they're all slaves to trying to do it right, rather than
trying to do it right, and doing is a muscular activity. So, and I think he was working out, and I think maybe I would say probably somewhat incompletely. I mean, I think he got to a certain point. I think other teachers after him, some of them, particularly Margaret Goldie, and I would say Marge Barstow, and Alexander's niece, Marjorie Barlow. Different person. All, and Walter Carrington, they were all very clear about this distinction. I think clearer than Alexander might have been. Because they had the advantage of all the work they'd done with him and all of his earlier thinking. And I think they took it a little further. And I think that my sense is that Margaret Goldie really took it the furthest, but I never met her, so I can't really say. But. So should we leave it at that?
I think, yes, but I'd be really curious to hear what any of our viewers think about all of it.
If you have an idea that's you have a different take on it, please let us know. And please let us know if there's another quote that you'd like us to dissect. We'll proceed through. There are quite a few that are good candidates, but I'm certainly be interested in hearing. Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome. This is fun.
My guest today is Imogen Ragone, an Alexander teacher in Wilmington, Delaware. I'll put a link to her website, a link to a site where you can learn more about the Alexander technique, and maybe a link to some other material that might be useful in terms of this quote. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.